Hey, what's up guys? How's it going? So today we're going to discuss basically troop building and how to do it, like, in a sense, what's the most effective way and why should you build things a certain way. Now, of course, when it comes to actually doing this, of course, you guys have always probably wondered, like, what is my strategy to, like, actually get the resources necessary to even do it in the first place? Now, to begin with, I honestly don't think a majority of those of you out there starting out are going to be able to do this, but I recommend that you start out by basically having some hyper accounts. And if you don't know what those are, just simply put, you're going to have certain accounts dedicated to just ore, stone, and timber and gold. And what you're going to do, right, is in the best case scenario, suppose you don't have it, then you can always do it like I do it, which is basically do 1.5 million, a mil, and then 1.6 mil, or something akin to that. Obviously not so great on the hourly production there, but what I'm ultimately doing is I build all of those resources up, and then I dump it over to an account. Now, again, you're probably wondering, well, what does that look like after a couple of weeks? Well, this is kind of what it looks like. And again, it takes a lot of time. All right, now it does take a little bit of effort because you do need to be able to shield, and you do need to be able to do it on a regular basis. And you tell we got a lot of gems on this account, so it's really not too hard to shield every day. But the main key factor here, right, is that you're basically building up a bulk of what you've got, right? Now, when you sit there and you build it up and you start getting all those resources and stuff like that, everybody's probably thought, or at least wondered, what's the proper building count? Now, generally speaking, right, the traditional way of doing it is, if you're doing tier 4s, do 1 barrack, because that's the best gem cost you're going to get. If you're doing, tier 3s, then do 3 barracks, or maybe 2 or 3 or 2 or 3. And well, and that, of course, everybody wonders, what's the difference? Well, now, to be honest with you, when you're doing like tier 2s and stuff like that, you probably want to do 3 barracks, okay? But if you're going to do tier 3s in particular, you're probably better off doing 2 barracks, because for the most part, right, at least in the cost reduction, it's tiny. I mean, it's like maybe a few hundred gems. But if you're printing these, like, and I say printing in the sense like you're going to build, right, a couple 100,000 of them, right, and you're going to sit down and you're just going to print a ton of them, right? The thing about it is and this is my thing, is that there are kind of like 2 ways to go about this, right? So you can either build them up and do 1 unit type at a time, and you can just build them up. And as you're sitting there, you build up your bulks and stuff like that. A lot of the time, when you've actually done it, there's kind of an interesting mindset that sets in when you actually do this, which is that, like, if you're gonna build up a couple 100,000 of whatever unit type you're going to build, interestingly enough, it also uses certain resources. So, like in this case, I'm not using up stone when I start out doing infantry. And a lot of the time, and I say this, in practice, is that, if you want to be careful about this and want to do it in a slow but manageable way, I recommend the way you ought to at least approach this, and when you actually decide to do it, is actually figure out what the total resource cost is going to be. Now, of course, I do have a spreadsheet, and you guys have probably heard these tools before, but really all we're doing is we're taking the total amount, and we go, pull up Excel or whatever it be, and all we're doing is pretty much taking the total amount of troops that we want. So theoretically, let's suppose I wanted 500,000. Okay, all I need to take is 500,000 times that total amount of 4.2 mil. And I know roughly how much resources is necessary to do that. So I can always look at my bank or my alt or whatever you're using to store your resources in, and I can look at it and say, do I have enough? Okay, I'm good to go, and I can print the troops. And of course, the time factor, right, which is the part that always kind of, it kind of slips some people. And this is kind of the part that, generally speaking, all right, in my opinion, if you are somebody that is wanting to do this and not doing it gemming wise, right? So you're not using gems to do it, then the better way to actually make the most out of your troops is to really do it in bulk. So, like, in the way I like to do it, I'm currently doing like 1, 2, 3, 4, like 5 barracks almost. And I mean, to be honest with you, is it the most efficient way? Probably not. Because honestly, I've never even looked at the stats on this, to be quite honest with you, and I could very well look at this more to kind of give you guys an idea of just, well, how much of a difference really is it between like doing 6,000 or so, say tier 4 at a time, you know, versus 30,000. And the only thing I can tell is that like here you're at 2 days, and obviously, you know, if you drop that down with like I think at 497, it's like a day and 1 hour, right? So at 6,000 units versus that at 30k, which obviously you can see that time has gone up exponentially, right? And again, I point this out because it's a pretty big deal. But if you actually go through and look at my current training speed right now, it's not very relevant. But you know, it would be different if I actually was trying to like increase it at the moment. But like if time is your essence, right, and you're trying to get the most out of it, then you're probably better at a 3 barrack setup than you are than a 4 or a 5 barrack setup. But part of the reason why I have it the way that I do is that 30,000 is like built in a single bulk in 12 days a pop, which is a lot of time, but I can break it down to where it's only like 9 days or 7 days. And the reason why, right, is so like essentially, right, with the current setup, you can see that I a lot of the time what I recommend you do is you actually build up these productions. But not to get off topic, but it's just for the most part you can add approximately like when you actually get into the late game side of things and stuff like that, it's about anywhere like around 500% or so is like really the sweet spot when it comes to training speed. And so a lot of the time what you do is you could take a lot of that effort and all that energy that you've taken, and you can eventually, like in a perfect world, you get rid of all of your infirmaries for the most part, and you go basically all manners. And you can see that I'm not doing this perfectly right now, and part of the reason why is because I'm just building up resources. Like, I'm not necessarily printing it, but I mean, to give you kind of at least some hindsight behind this, like, the idea behind doing multiple barracks is so that you don't necessarily do this by troops, but rather by speeds. And so for me, doing 30,000 a pop is a little easier than, say, if I had done, you know, 6k a pop a dozen times. Although it may be a little bit more efficient, I also have to click the 6k button a gajillion times, doing it gymming wise over and over and over again, which for me is not really it's not ideal, right? Because again, I in my world, I'd rather do 30,000 a pop a 12-day, use some speeds, and look at it another day. Because the way I approach this game is I like to use my speeds. I don't necessarily use my gems when it comes to gymming troops. Because for the most part, at least in my experience, I always find myself in a certain situation where I need gems for a lot of other things. And not to say that you can't gem your troops, because you can. I really think there's a viable way to do it. In fact, I think Tashi has a really good video on this particular topic and has done it, and I won't even deny it. It's like unfathomably better. And I think, you know, even in that instance, in the way that he described the way to approach it, you know, for me at least, when it comes to approaching building troops this particular route, is that rather than gymming your troops, you're trying to do it by speeds. And so ultimately, the goal in trying to do this, right, is that you guys have probably all have seen, or at least particularly have at least noticed in the past, that you've probably seen these army boot camp packs. And roughly, right, and that's just going off of what you've already seen, right? If it's going to cost me at least 9 to 10 days, right, at 10 days a pop, 30k each, that means for sure, guaranteed, I'm going to get exactly 60,000 tier 4 with those 20 days for the speeds. So it rationally doesn't make a whole lot of sense for just about anybody, really. It really doesn't. Compared to, like, had you done 6,000 a pop, okay, if I recall, I think at 6,000 a pop, it's somewhere akin to like 3,000 gems. All right, you put that in perspective, at 3,000 gems a pop, for the same amount, right, which is 60,000, you just do that times 10, it's 30,000 gems. So it kind of go, you know, back and forth, you know, with where you're at with it. In my opinion, the gem cost to the speed cost there is it kind of goes both ways. Like, on the one hand, you know, getting 30,000 gems is kind of hard to do, but on the other hand, getting the speeds may be a little bit easier. Now, granted, you know, depending on what you're ultimately aiming to do, right? Because again, the gem cost aspect of it can be cheaper, but it could also simultaneously be more difficult depending on what you're mass building, right? Because if you've got a lot of gyms, then ultimately it's going to work out. But if you don't, and you don't regularly have a good flow of it coming in, then it may be very difficult. And so the way I've gone about it is I'm just doing it through barracks. And right now this seems to be working for me because, frankly, if you get 30,000 every week, right, that's really not so bad. Like 30K a week is easy. And that's really it's not terribly difficult to go and approach it that way. Now, I will say that there are some things that you can do that can really improve it, to say the least, right? Which is that if you're really wanting to build your troops and you're wanting to build them faster, quicker, and everything else, one of the things you got to make sure you do is you got to get your manners up to par. And there's a lot into this that really boils down to the training speed, but a lot of different things that a lot of people don't pay attention to, a lot of the time anyway, is that your heroes are actually a pretty good portion of this. So, like, for example, like if you really want to bulk up, you can like get Stormfox, for example, and there's like another 20% there that you can get. There are other heroes like Dream Witch that just so happen to have the same exact skill. You know, like if you can find any of your heroes that are in fact even remotely boosting up your training speed, that's ultimately going to make it a little bit faster. And of course, you guys have probably all seen or at least heard of the new gear set, which is another example of where you can increase your actual production on the training speed. Now, even 10 to 15% at some point really doesn't seem like much on the timers. Like, you'll notice that it probably drops it at best 30 seconds, maybe even a minute. But it doesn't sound like a lot until you start to multiply that by like the number of troops that you build. So it's just a food for thought, you know, something to consider at least when you are building your troops. Now, having that said, at least on a real note, right? If you guys are trying to build up a lot of troops, right? The only thing that I can really say for you anyway is that if you are trying to build up an enormous quantity, you need to plan this stuff out in advance. Because ultimately, if you don't, it's going to be really hard to maintain them. And I can say it myself. I've been zeroed not once, but twice, on almost 3 times now. And to be honest with you, the 3 times that I've done it, it was always because I was in between trying to get over the hill, which is that ultimately it's very difficult between 0 to 6 million troops. Because and I say that because if you don't have a little over 6.5 to 7 million plus tier 3 to tier 4 troops, it is insanely difficult to maintain that. And so ultimately, at least the approach that I'm trying to go with here, and the reason why I'm saying it like I am, is because on the one hand, if you maintain your shielding every single day, you're never going to see an issue. All right, but if the moment you slip, you're going to lose it all. That's the one thing that is very, very, very conscious of. So whenever I'm building these, you know, I'm building 30K a pop or so, right? But I'm not trying to build them all at once because I know that if and when I decide to actually build them all, I will do it once I know I've got the amount I need. Now, of course, if you're wondering how do you know, I will have links in the description below towards videos that I've made that'll actually explain it more in detail for you. And of course, I will have a video in the description below about the video that I was describing with Tashi, of course. But needless to say, that is pretty much it, all I can say on the topic of actually trying to build up troops faster. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and hopefully you'll check out these. And I'll see you guys next time.